Hello, everybody. Welcome to Calls. This is the 2023 John Deere Initial Research Show. First off, shout out from the community. Congratulations to Darnell, who had the win ticket on Ricky Fowler this week at the Rocket Mortgage Classic. Congratulations, Darnell, on your hit. Big success. I don't think it's any surprise if anyone's been following golf for the past 6 months or so. Ricky has been playing much better, back to seemingly his old form, has risen into the top 30 in the OWGR, but more so for our purposes, congratulations, Darnell, on your successful win wager on Ricky this week at the Rocket Mortgage Classic. And if you had success as a member of the community here at Calls, please jump in chat or let me know via social media, get in touch with me, email, however you need to get a hold of me. I want to be able to shout out members of the community that have success like Darnell just had this past week at the Rocket Mortgage Classic. So if you had success, let me know. For yours truly, it was another very disappointing week for me in terms of wagers and DFS. DFS can simply be summarized by the statement that I decided to play Tony Finau over Ricky Fowler. That sums up my week very concisely. I decided to take a very big chance, knowing Ricky was on fire. He was rated very high in my model, but all of the ownership I tried to play a little bit of game theory backfired. I played a lot of Tony Finau, played Tom Kim, the other players that were pretty decent, Nikolai Højgaard, S.H. Kim, all of these other players. Keegan Bradley had a good showing, but it was not nearly enough to make up for the fact that I decided to fade Ricky, and that was my ultimate downfall. So hopefully you had much more success than I did for the Rocket Mortgage Classic, and you are ready to move to the John Deere, which historically has had some pretty weak fields. This one might top it, in my opinion. This is a very weak field. The majority of the premier players on the PGA Tour are taking this week off, flying over to Scotland to prepare for the Open Championship and next week for the Scottish Open. So really not a whole lot here at the John Deere Classic this week. So we're going to see what we can find, maybe some gems, some diamonds in the rough, if you will. Pretty weak field, not quite alternate level, alternate event level, but it's pretty close. So we're going to see what gems we can find, and hopefully the odds will reflect a pretty weak field tomorrow and give us some good values. So looking forward to digging into a little bit of the research for the John Deere and get us prepared to make some solid wagers tomorrow when the odds come out. So let's get into it. All statistics provided tonight and every night are from fantasynational.com. It is simply the best tool out there for your money. It's going to make you a much smarter golf gambler and a much better golf DFS player. Go check them out. It's simply well worth your investment. In the description to the video, there are links to all of the social media, my Twitter and Instagram, where I post research for the PGA Tour every week. That'll be no different. I will have my research out for the John Deere tomorrow afternoon. So if you want to see that research, give me a follow at Twitter or Instagram, your preferred social media site of preference. Twitter is also where I place my betting cards on the PGA Tour. So if you want to see the weekly wagers that I make, give me a follow over at Twitter. And then finally, Twitter is where I do my baseball content. It has been a little while now since I have been able to post something. Hopefully that'll pick up again shortly. But if you want to see some quick hitting baseball content, give me a follow at Twitter as well. Lastly, for social media, Gabe's Twitter is in the description as well. I know he had a decent week or potential for a week coming into the weekend, knowing that he was very high on Ricky Fowler, like a lot of people. But Gabe writes a very good article called The Fringe. It's a great way to prepare for your week ahead in PGA Tour. So I highly recommend you go give Gabe a follow over at Twitter and subscribe to his article called The Fringe. We've been working pretty closely together for the past couple of months, to 2 or 3 months now. He's had some success. I've certainly had a little bit of success. When you get two analytic minds together, generally we can narrow down on some pretty good values and plays. And that reminds me that on Wednesday evenings, I will be in his Substack chat. So if you want to continue the DFS discussion after my show on Wednesday evenings, if you are a member of his subscription, or if you've subscribed to his article, then you will be able to join us in his Substack chat. So a lot of good things there, but honestly, I really do recommend subscribing to that article. It's a very good read. And his Twitter Twitter handle is in the description. Finally, for this very elongated, unplanned intro, we are live. Chat is open. Again, want to hear from you all. What do you think of the John Deere? How was your Rocket Mortgage? Who are you keying in on earliest potential values, perhaps in the odds boards? All of that good stuff. Would love the interaction. So jump in chat. Looking forward to it. Let's do our initial research for the 2023 John Deere Classic. And we're going to start, as we always do, on a Sunday evening over at the GCSAA tournament fact sheet. If you hear fireworks, happy early 4th of July, Independence Day to everyone out there. But if you hear fireworks, I can't help that. I am pretty close to an open field where a lot of people generally gather to fire off fireworks for the 4th. So hopefully that won't be too distracting. But we are going to be looking at the John Deere Classic, which has been a pretty long-running event on the PGA Tour since 2000, when TPC Deere Run opened. We are in Silvis, Illinois, right on the Iowa border. TPC Deere Run is a par 71 that measures almost 7,300 yards. And I'm going to tell you, this seeing this yardage was a bit surprising for me. I always thought the John Deere was shorter, so there's no notes about the course lengthening or anything to that effect. This yardage surprised me, so we will get into, of course, the Fantasy National course breakdown and all that stuff. We'll see where the length of the course comes in. I'm going to tell you right now, this course plays much, much shorter than this. While we won't be looking at short course metrics, it does play much shorter than this 7,300 yards or close to it listed. You see the stint listed at 12. These greens have historically been labeled as fast. That I don't see that changing. Of course, being a summer event in the Midwest, heat and dry, that's what you would expect. The average green size is about 5,500 square feet. So depending on what source you are looking at, could be right at average or perhaps a little bit under tour average. I still think the average green size on the PGA Tour is about 6,000 square feet, so I would label these a bit smaller than the average green size, but you might see some sources listed at 5,500. Either way, we are on average at biggest, at largest size greens. 28 acres of fairway, and that actually belies how wide these fairways are, how forgiving these fairways are, especially where PGA Tour pros are hitting their driver. These are very, very forgiving and wide fairways. The challenge for professionals is in this rough, that if you are not finding the fairway, it is pretty difficult to play out of, but there is plenty of fairway to play out of. And that's why you will see we will be focusing on a particular filter for the majority of the week again this week, as we were for the Rocket Mortgage. Only 3 holes with water in play. The greens are pure bent, so no having to look for specific courses this week. We are just on pure bent grass greens, and bent grass throughout the entirety of the course, with the exception of the rough, which is bluegrass and fescue, not unlike the Travelers a little bit in Connecticut, although this is much more bluegrass than fescue. But it does get pretty long and can be pretty difficult to play out of. But there's a look at TPC Deere Run in Silvis, Illinois from a GCSA tournament fact sheet standpoint. Nothing to do with Architect either. This is a DA Wabering design, but a mid-length par 71 measuring about 7,300 yards. Generally, they have been fast bent greens, large fairways, so don't pay too much attention to this acreage of fairway that actually kind of underestimates or underscores how easy these fairways are to hit. A lot of rough, and thick rough at that, so if the players are off the fairway, tough to play out of. Only 3 holes with water in play, and we are on bent grass greens. So with that, we're going to move to Fantasy National. And before I forget, there have already been several field changes from when the field came out on Friday evening. But your 5 players that have withdrawn from the John Deere Classic: Webb Simpson, Charlie Hoffman, Vincent Norman, C.T. Pan, and Brandon Wu. Those 5 players have withdrawn. So I'm going to make sure I remember that, or try to remember that as we move through a few things tonight. And that's why I kind of led off the show with that, to put that in my mind. So that way I don't keep saying players that have already withdrawn. But those 5 have already withdrawn. You see here, I've got this sorted on total performance in 2023. Your top total performer this calendar year has been Denny McCarthy, that is in the field this week. And this is no disrespect to Denny McCarthy, but when he is your number 1 strokes gained total player, despite the fact how well he's playing, this is a pretty weak field. Now, the biggest name here at TPC Deere Run at the John Deere Classic this week is Cameron Young. Passed him up. There you go. Is Cameron Young. You see, he has not quite had the 2023 follow-up that the rookie 2022 campaign was for him. But clearly the biggest name is Cameron Young. You've got a few other fairly high-profile players, I suppose. Emiliano Grillo, a win earlier this year. Of course, the outstanding rookie Ludwig Aberg. Sepp Straka has a win on tour. Keith Mitchell. Other players here. Kuchar, longtime veteran, loves playing the John Deere Classic. Taylor Moore, a winner this year. But those are some of the bigger names. Russell Henley, Chris Kirk. When those are your premier players in the field, it's a weaker field. No doubt about that. So there's a list of the premier players in the field this week. Let's go ahead and move to the course breakdown here in Fantasy National. First thing I like to do when looking at a scorecard, look at the 9th and 10th most difficult holes, try to figure out where par is. If par falls in between the 9th and 10th or around there, you know that course plays to right at average. We see the 9th most difficult hole still plays to under par. 8th still plays to under par. The 7th still plays to under par. You have to go in between the 7th and 6th most difficult holes to find par. Now, these scores aren't astronomically low. I mean, 100th under par, 200ths under par, 200ths under par. So not a humongous birdie fest like the Rocket Mortgage was, but certainly on the easier end in terms of difficulty. And you will see that by the 3 par 5s here at TPC Deere Run. The easiest, par 5 second, a full half a shot under par and yields a decent eagle rate at 4%. The par 5 17th, 3500ths of a shot under par, a decent eagle rate. I should probably give the par 5 second a good eagle rate score at 4%, 2.5%. You also have what I will say is a semi-drivable par 4 in the par 4 14th at 361. You see it's almost 1%. I say semi-drivable because they do move the tee up a day or two. So So depending on how they set the round up or set that hole up for the day, this can be a drivable par 4, but that's really the only par 4 that's drivable. But the other par 5 also very easy at a quarter of a shot under par. So these par 5s, just like the Rocket Mortgage and Detroit Golf Club, you have to get these par 5s. They are extremely easy and they're all attackable. There's no long par 5s, no true 3-shot par 5s. You have to go get these par 5s. Now, the most difficult hole is pretty darn difficult. Par 4 ninth measures to 2/10 of a shot over par, and the finishing hole is fairly difficult at 1700ths, but you very, very quickly get into the single digits in terms of hundredths. You got 400ths, 200ths, 900ths, a lot more scores under par than over par here at TPC Deere Run. So there's a look at the scorecard. Let's move to the average strokes gained by shot type and all of the charts here in Fantasy National. For the top 10, there's a slight bit of a lean into ball striking as you see approach and putting darn near equal. Approach slightly higher. Off the tee, I'm going to tell you this is a bit misleading in the opposite direction than what we say. I think off the tee is actually a bit more important, even though these fairways are easy to hit. And I will show you that, or why I believe that, in Microsoft Excel later this evening. But I do think off the tee is going to carry a little bit more significant weight than what this graph is showing you. But clearly the two main shot types there. Moving into the top 5s, your putting quickly overtakes the approach, and around the green starts to catch up to off the tee. And then for your winners, if you're winning the tournament, you're going to be making putts. That's no surprise. But the approach still very important, and off the tee is still looking like it is mitigated in terms of importance because around the green is darn near the same value. So I will, again, in Microsoft Excel, show you why I think this is a bit misleading. I still consider this a ball striking course, even though you will have a lot of wedges in your hand, a lot of approaches in the 100 to 125 ranges we'll see here in a moment. But there's a look at your strokes gained by shot type for your top 10s, 5s, and winners. Move to average strokes gained by hole by par. Again, no surprise. Par 5s, you got to take advantage of them, even for your top 10s. Now, these par 3s are carrying some weight, and that's going to be a pretty common theme throughout the top 10 or so, top 10s and top 5s. But par 5 still maintaining their importance. Par 4s start to perhaps gain a little bit of distance from the par 3s in terms of strokes gained for the top 5s. And then your winners, again, all par 5s. Par 3s really stay connected really with the par 4s. Par 4s don't really take off in terms of importance away from the par 3s. So probably looking at a sense that the par 4s might be a bit mitigated again. There is one less par 4 at TPC Deere Run, with this being a par 71. But these par 3s, they are going to carry a bit of weight this week. So there's a look at your strokes gained by hole by par. Hole composition, your par 3s are very evenly distributed. One short, one medium length, one long, and one very long par 3. So at least graphically, nothing that would signify that we need to take a look at a specific range. But again, we will look in Microsoft Excel for some more detailed data. Your par 4s, you do have the one, quote, semi-drivable par 4 that's at 361, but they do move that around and they do move it up, or they do move the tees up on some days, so that can be a drivable. But two short par 4s, the majority of your holes here at TPC Deere Run measure from 400 to 450. You do have a few long par 4s, including the very difficult par 4 18th at 476. You also have a very long par 4 at 500 yards, or 503, I should say, the par 4 9th. So you've got a few longer par 4s, but the majority of your par 4s here at TPC Deere Run measure from 400 to 450. And every single par 3, at least on the scorecard, measures 550 to 600. So another potential week where we're going to single out a couple of ranges in the par 4s and the par 5s, and especially the par 5s, since all three fall into this range here. Approach shot distribution. Again, I said 100 to 125 for wedges. It's actually the 125 to 150, but still wedges for professionals. That is your most common approach shot here at TPC Deere Run, right at 20%, and 3% more than the average tour event. You see 200 plus just due to the 3 par 5s and the very long par 4. They do garner a few approach shots, 20.5%, but at least in relation to the PGA Tour average, you're looking at 125 to 150, and even a little bit of 75 to 100 as the majority of your approach shots here at TPC Deere Run. To highlight the ease that TPC Deere Run has generally been, you see the majority of cut lines has been at maybe -2 to -3. You do have a few years at -1 if the wind does pick up, but generally a pretty easy test. -2 would signify average, but certainly on the easier end of average. -3, you're starting to get into easy territory. So the John Deere hovering right on that easy border, and that is the filter we're going to be using quite a bit. As you see, almost 22% birdie rate here at the John Deere Classic at TPC Deere Run, whereas bogeys are only at 13%. Bogeys aren't out of the question, especially if you are wayward. That rough can be thick, it can be long, can be difficult to play out of, but generally the fairways are pretty forgiving, so that's why you see such a very low scoring average here. Doubles do happen, especially on the holes with water in play, but the eagles aren't non-existent, I should say. There is a little bit of a bar here, so you can see totaling the scores that are under par, totaling the scores that are over par, a lot more scores that are under par, so we're looking at generally an easy tournament. Driving accuracy, again, speaking to the wideness and the ease of the fairways, 71% fairways hit here. Now, there are a couple of forced layups off the tee, but nothing to the extent of, say, Harbor Town or the Honda PGA National, where that is a clear design of the courses that a lot of those tee shots are forced layups. You do have a couple here, but most of the time players are going to have driver in their hand, and the fairways are still easy to hit. Greens, even though these greens are slightly smaller than the average tour green size, greens are easy to hit here, 70%. Again, speaking to the ease that the John Deere Classic has generally been. Scrambling, much more closer to average than the Rocket Mortgage was, but still easier than the average tour event. 58, 59% here versus an average tour event of 57.5. 3 putts per round, not really a thing here, especially with these greens being smaller. Generally, players are used to at least some kind of bent by this point in the calendar year. I know we've been on bent in Poa annua a lot lately, but at least some form of bent, and they're not so lightning fast that they're difficult to putt on, and they're not super slow that's going to throw the players for a loop. So generally pretty fair greens here. And again, speaking to just some ease of the John Deere Classic, driving distances are longer than the average tour event. Now, there are some forced layups that are keeping the driving distance down a little bit, but you still see it's longer than the average tour event, even though accuracy is much higher here. So nothing, at least graphically, would signify that off the tee there would be much to gain from off the tee. I'm going to show you why in fantasy or in Microsoft Excel, why I think that might be misleading, and why, at least early on this week, I think off the tee is something I want to look at. Then finally, green and regulation proximity. Again, with the ease of the course, smaller greens, a lot of times professionals are going to have wedges in their hand. Proximity is much closer to the hole than the average tour event. 27.5 feet here, 29 feet the average tour event. So there's a look at TPC Deere Run from a scorecard and graphical view. Before we move back to the player page view, very quickly, let's cover the historic conditions. Most of the time you will see easy rounds. You will get some average rounds, sure, but what you won't see is difficult. Very few average rounds, a lot of easy rounds. Again, you'll get an average round maybe once a year, twice a year, but you don't see any difficult rounds to par. The rough has always been long. The greens are always bent. So clearly we're going to be looking at bent greens. These greens have actually been very, very receptive. They have to water them quite extensively. Again, being in the Midwest, in the middle of summer, heat, dry, so they get a lot of water. They put a lot of water on the greens, making them pretty receptive, at least by PGA Tour standards. And the greens, they can slow them down a little bit just because of the amount of water, but generally speaking, the past 3 or 4 years or so, they have been fast. All right, now we'll move to the player page view here at Fantasy National. Because we just looked at the green speeds, we'll take a look at bent green putting, and I'm going to have to expand the timeline. I don't know if 2022 is going to have enough rounds since there are many more Bermuda courses than bent. Although it does look like we will have, Adams Vinson's got plenty. Sargent and Aberg, rookies, are brand new on the tour, so they're naturally going to have few rounds. But most players in the field this week do have at least double digits in the past 18 months. So I think that's going to be fine in terms of sample size. So your top putters on bent greens, I'm not going to do anything with speed filter just yet. Your top putters on bent greens in the past 18 months have been Denny McCarthy, Christian Bezaidnout, Justin Lauer, Brendan Todd, Sang You'll Know, Eric Cole, Austin Cook, JT Poston, your defending champion, Patrick Rogers, Taylor Montgomery, and Bo Hostler. All right, let me do something that's going to help me very quickly. Let me star these players that have withdrawn, and that way I will know to skip them whenever they appear on a few of these lists. CT Pan, I thought he was, there he is. And then the final one is Brandon Wu. Okay, sorry, let me get those players started. That way I don't give you all incorrect information as we move forward this evening, and I will make sure to absolutely have that for tomorrow in the Data Dive show. But there's your top putters on bent grass greens the past 18 months. We'll go ahead and look at fast bent greens. I am pretty confident that they're going to be fast, but I'm going to be honest with you, I saw quite a few more average rounds than I remember for the John Deere Classic. Now, every single speed last year was labeled as fast. We didn't have the fourth round for whatever reason. But 2 rounds in 2021 were average, and the entire tournament as recent as 2018 was average. So, again, if I had to guess, I think they're going to be listed as fast. But it's not a guarantee. That's why I wanted to lead off with just bent. But your top performers on fast bent greens in that same time period, going back 18 months to the start of 2022. Christian Bezaidnout, Denny McCarthy, Brendan Todd, Austin Cook, Sang You'll Know, Justin Lauer, Ricky Barnes, K.H. Lee, Ben Crane, and Bo Hostler. So a humongous amount of overlap here. I think McCarthy and Bezaidnout maybe swap places 1 and 2. Brendan Todd's generally up there for putting anyway. Justin Lauer was up there in the top 10 for bent putting. Hostler, but you get a couple of players that rise into the top 10. Ricky Barnes, K.H. Lee, Ben Crane. These players rise when you factor in specifically fast bent greens. All right. With that, we're going to take those filters off. Again, nothing to do with Architect. This is a D.A. Webring design. We'll look at wind tomorrow and especially Wednesday. Not going to do anything with course length, even though this course plays shorter than 7,300 yards. Still does measure 7,300 yards, so I'm not going to do anything with course filter. Let's just go ahead and jump straight into easy relative to par. Another tournament where winning scores are in the 20s usually. Just a very gettable tournament for professionals, especially professionals who are playing well that week. So your top performers in easy rounds relative to par the past 18 months: Seamus Power, Russell Henley, Alex Smalley, Taylor Montgomery, Eric Cole, JT Poston, Matt Kuchar, Mark Hubbard, Tyler Duncan, and Akshay Bhatia. Don't recall any of these guys being top 10 on the putting, so a pretty brand new list of names here that you might want to consider early on in DFS, or perhaps highlight for potential wagering options tomorrow when the odds boards come out. If they would have overlapped putting and strokes gained total, then that would have been somebody to really key in on. All right. Last thing we'll look at, maybe two more things. I'm going to take that filter off. Let's narrow this back into this calendar year. And we'll look at strokes gained approach. Again, it's just the most important shot type in golf, in my opinion. And we saw it on the graphs, approach is pretty darn important here, or at least is as important as the putting for a change. Seemingly the past month, these have been putting contests, or at least the courses historically have been putting contests. Now we're on a more traditional ball striking course. So your top strokes gained approach players this calendar year in the field this week: Nate Lashley, Mark Hubbard, Sepp Straka, Russell Henley, Emiliano Grillo, Ryan Palmer, Eric Cole, Alex Smalley, Ben Martin, and Kevin Roy. And then last thing we will look at in terms of specific rankings wise, or top performers, let's go ahead and look at par fives, because they are so drastically important here at the John Deere, even though there are only 3 of them. And I'm just going to go ahead and go straight to the 550 to 600, because all 3 par fives measure to that length. So your top performers this calendar year on par fives, 550 to 600 yards: Matt Kuchar, Pat Desire, Ludwig Aberg, Nick Taylor, Adam Long, Dylan Wu, Harry Higgs, Kevin Chappell, K.H. Lee, and Mark Hubbard. So there's a few names and a few rankings to consider as you begin your research this week for the John Deere, for your DFS. Some names to potentially look at for odds tomorrow. If you see a name and a number that you like, having referenced these top 10 rankings and these couple of metrics. Now let's go to the tournament history, or the strokes gained total tab, however you like to phrase it, here at the John Deere Classic the past 5 years. I say 5 years, past 5 editions. Of course, 2020 not being played because 2020 was a ridiculous year. All right, your defending champion is JT Poston, and he has not particularly played well at the John Deere Classic before his win last year. He had missed the cut 2 years prior to that, or the 2 editions prior to that, T65, T64. So right off the bat there, you get a sense that prior course performance probably isn't the biggest deal here at TPC Deere Run. Or at least it wasn't for JT Poston. In 2021, Lucas Glover was your winner. Now, he had a decent amount of success before his win, a T10, a T25. 2019, Dylan Fratelli. it was his first time, so no course form there. 2018, Michael Kim. 2017, that was that Bryson? I know Bryson's won here. Jordan Spieth's won a couple of times. I'll have to double check. I can't remember off the top of my head who 2017's winner was. So right off the bat, you get a sense that prior course performance it can matter, but it's not a huge deal. It's not a reason to eliminate a player. As you saw, JT Poston wins after missing the cut the prior two performances. Dylan Fratelli had never played the John Deere Classic. Where did he go? There he is. Dylan Fratelli had never played the John Deere Classic and won it. Michael Kim in 2018, a T71. He had other performances, and I can show you that a little bit later, but prior course performance isn't the biggest deal for the John Deere. Your strokes gained total leader the past 5 editions has been Lucas Glover. Now, he did miss the cut last year, but he has won. He's a top 10, a top 25. He's played pretty well here. Patrick Rogers, 4 for 4. Patton Kazire, 4 for 4. Zach Johnson, 5 for 5, but he is a winner, previous winner, way back in 2012, but a previous winner, and he has had 6 top 5s at the John Deere Classic. So he is somebody who just generally loves playing here at TPC Deere Run. Scott Brown, a bit of all or nothing. 2 missed cuts, a top 5 and a top 15. Russell Henley, the 2 appearances he's played very, very well. Seamus Power, probably no surprise. The course plays pretty short. It plays easy. Seamus Power loves easy courses. He loves short courses. It makes a lot of sense that Seamus Power has played well here. Adam Shank, top 5, top 6. A miscut. He withdrew last year, but he's played well. Some other names to perhaps consider. Chesson Hadley, 4 for 4. Adam Long, 3 for 3. Adams Vincent's 2 for 2. Hank Lebiota missed the cut his first time. Top 10 and a middling finish. We have Martin Laird, 3 for 3. 3, top 30 to middling finishes, but decent performances. So there's a look at some names in terms of players who have played the John Deere well. The other end of the spectrum, players that have repeatedly shown that they have not played all that well at the John Deere Classic. But again, take this quite a bit more with a grain of salt, as we saw JT Poston had never had any amount of success and performed well here. But players who haven't played TPC Deere Run well, DJ Trahan, Sung Kang, Ricky Barnes, he was up there for putting on fast bent. He's not played the John Deere well. Scott Piercy, Arjun Otwal, Brendan Todd, another one of the putters that has not played well here. He does have one high-end finish in the top 20, but overall, strokes gained total-wise, he has played pretty poorly at TPC Deere Run. Brian Stewart, Ryan Armour, 0 for 4. Brian Gay, another premier putter, a very good putter, 1 for 4. Trey Mullinax, 1 for 4, a top 20 and 3 missed cuts. Joel Damon, only 2 for 4. That's Troy Merritt, 2 for 4. Joel Damon, runner-up and 2 missed cuts. So literally all or nothing. So there's a look at some of the players that have not played well at TPC Deere Run for the John Deere Classic. All right, that's a good segue. We're going to move on over to Microsoft Excel. First thing we're going to do, let's look at the comparison course data chart or graph, not graph, comparison course chart or sheet that I maintain. As a reminder, when we are looking at a specific course, we are looking at those metrics compared to other full field courses on the PGA Tour. Other full field continuous courses on the PGA Tour. That's why you won't see anything for the Open, because those courses rotate. You won't see anything at the U.S. Open, the Canadian Open. They rotate. I also don't gather anything for the Tournament of Champions, the CJ Cup, the Zozo, the BMW. Those fields are limited. 70 to 80 players, and Tournament of Champions about 40. That would skew the data. So I don't collect the data, or I don't compare them. I do collect it, but I don't compare them or use them in the comparison for this chart. So again, this is a comparison against other full field continuous courses on the PGA Tour. We saw this graphically. Strokes gained off the tee looks completely neutral. It's not favorable or unfavorable here at TPC Deere Run. Completely neutral. I'm going to skip these three for a second. We'll come back to them. But the reason why I think that's a bit misleading, we saw that the fairways, they're generally easy to hit, but they are important. For your top 30 players, on average, they've been hitting a lot of fairways against the field. I mean, not just as a raw percentage. Against the field, they're gaining fairways. Okay. That's only one half of off the tee. Perhaps just fairways are the most important. But distance is also something. 33% more important. These are both halves of the off the tee. And yet off the tee is only neutral. Something isn't adding up there, and that's why I think off the tee is going to be a bit more important than what the graphs and what the data is showing. We'll have to dig into it, and we'll do that tomorrow, going into the prior leaderboards. We'll do a little bit tonight with the players, and perhaps we can find who's played well continuously here, whether they're doing it in distance or fairways. But when you look at those three, something's not adding up there when the distance and the fairways matter, but off the tee, and matter a big amount. But off the tee is exactly neutral. That's why I'm thinking this is a bit misleading. I think off the tee is actually going to be a bit more important than what you might think. Approach, 8% more important than the average full field course. Putting, 15% more important. It can get a little bit skewed from winners, sure, but I am gathering the data from the top 30 performers. So putting is still a big deal here. So we're going to have some putting in the mixed condition model. Around the green is less significant. These greens are easy to hit. The course definitely plays easy. It plays shorter than 7,300 yards. Don't see around the green factoring much this week. We talked about distance and fairways. We'll take a look at greens just very quickly. Slightly above neutral in terms of importance here at TBC Deere Run, but nothing astronomical. Makes sense. Course is easy. All of that I've mentioned several times. So the greens might not be the biggest deal this week. Going into scoring, again, like we were looking at last week for the Rocket Mortgage, and you see the discrepancy there in terms of birdies gained versus bogeys avoided. A lot of the same for the John Deere at TBC Deere Run. Perhaps not as big of a gap, 23 to -5, a 28 percentage point difference. Here it's only about a 20% percentage point difference, but it's still a big gap. Birdies gained are just a big deal. Here at TBC Deere Run, you got to go low to contend. So we're going to be looking at birdies are better gained. Eagles you see is completely neutral. I don't think that means we'll have to look at eagles by themselves. There aren't enough par fours that yield eagles, and the par fives, while there is a 4% and a 2.5%, they aren't necessarily astronomical like, say, the Barbasol or the Wyndham, where eagles galore happen. So we're just going to be looking at birdies are better gained. Moving into the par threes, you see they're slightly under importance compared to the average full field continuous course. Okay, there's only one par 3 in each of these ranges here at TPC Deere Run, so naturally it doesn't look like any of the ranges are the most important. So when we go into the detail tomorrow and the prior leaderboards, we'll see just how important the par 3s are, if any at all. At least statistically, it's saying they're less significant, but they were pretty close to the par 4s graphically in Fantasy National. I think the par 3s might be a bit of something. I'm not going to say they're extremely important. You need to put a lot of weight in there, but I think they're a little bit something. Par 4s here at TPC Deere Run, 2% more important, so slightly above average, but look at the range that has the majority of the par 4s, 28% more important. So perhaps we're looking at a scenario where we just want to single out this range of par 4s. And again, we'll really cover that tomorrow. Then par 5s, they're saying they are net neutral. I would tend to think that these are going to be a bit more important than that. All 3 fall into this range, so clearly they don't lengthen them all that much, and when they do, they don't matter. When they shorten them, they don't particularly matter. Again, when we look at the raw detail, we'll see if this range makes up the majority of the total in strokes gained, and I imagine they do. All right, lastly, in terms of comparison, looking at proximity, a little surprising for me to see that proximity is 20% more important here, especially when the greens are smaller. It's an easy tournament. I wouldn't think proximity would be a big deal. It wasn't at the Rocket Mortgage because it's easy. Even though that course is longer, the greens are smaller. So this is a little odd for me to see. Now, 75 to 100 apparently looks pretty darn important. Actually, all 4 of these ranges also look like they are above average or above neutral in terms of importance. So again, another situation where we're going to have to really dig in tomorrow into the prior leaderboards, look at some specifics and see if there's something we want to single out here. Don't know if there is or not. But anyway, there's a look at TPC Deere Run in terms of comparing it against other full field continuous courses on the PGA Tour. We're going to close the show, as we always do on a Sunday evening, with the early look file. And this is, as a reminder, performance specifically at TPC Deere Run the past 4 years. Normally I do 5 years, but there's only 4 because 2020 was ridiculous. So with that, you have your player, the number of times they have played TPC Deere Run, the John Deere Classic, their average finish, and their strokes gained across whatever various metric we're looking at. So for example, Russell Henley has played twice in the past 4 years at the John Deere Classic. He has averaged a 7th place finish. He has averaged 0.8 off the tee in those years. He's averaged 7 on approach, 2.3 putting, etc., etc. All right, I'm going to filter out the players that have at least played in half of the past 4 John Deere Classics. I don't want to get any outliers. I don't want to see anybody who's only played it once. I just want to get a feel for the players who play it consistently and what they are performing well at. And we'll go to, let's go to the top 40. Players who have averaged a top 40 here at the John Deere Classic the past 4 editions. This is 18 players. Okay, so off the tee is a 1.0. Approach is a 2.1. You would expect that. Perhaps maybe not as big of a doubling margin, but it is what it is. In fact, you only have 1 player that's negative in terms of approach here at TPC Deere Run. that has performed well. So strokes gained approach is quite important. Around the green doesn't look very high, only a 0.7. So again, that's why I still think off the tee is going to be more important than what the graphs showed and what the data said, that 0.0 or net neutral. Only 2 players are negative off the tee here as well. I still feel this is a ball striking course. Around the green, unimportant. Putting, this is probably going to be a bit lower of a number because there are quite a few players that are negative. Yeah, this is a 1.7, but some pretty daggone really good performances, especially for players who have played in multiple years. Ryan Moore, 4 for 4, averaging 3 strokes gained putting per year. Adams Vincent's only twice, but he's averaging almost gaining 5. Dylan Fratelli gaining almost 5. Sam Ryder's gaining 4. So lots of good putting performances here historically at the John Deere Classic. Okay, moving across. All right, I mean, distance, at least for the players who have been playing TBC Deere Run at an elite level, look, most of them have been negative in terms of driving distance. So perhaps that's something that is misleading in terms of the players that have averaged the top 30. Maybe we'll see that in the prior leaderboards, that distance maybe doesn't matter that much. It's interesting to see, at least for the players that have played TBC Deere Run at an elite level, distance isn't a big deal. Fairways, it looks like a fairly middling number. Actually, it's pretty low, 1.8. All right. So, again, more research that we'll be able to go into tomorrow, and we'll do tomorrow. Looking into scoring, we saw that birdies just heavily outweighed bogey avoidance, just like it did last week for the Rocket Mortgage. Russell Henley, very good at both, but still birdies gained. Kazire birdies. Svensson balanced. Ryan Moore birdies. Lucas Glover birdies. Mark Hubbard a bit more in the bogeys. Seamus birdies. Adam Long birdies. Adam Shank birdies. So in the top 40, you've got, how many players is this? That's 9, so 8 that were birdies. 9, 10, 11. 11 of the 18 that are comprising the top 40, or the averaging a top 40, are fairly heavily favoring birdies gained over bogeys avoided. This is a 2.5, 2.0. So you gotta go low. You gotta go low at the John Deere Classic. Get the birdies. Very quickly, pars 3s, 4s, and 5s. 3s, that's a 1.0. Par 4s, a 1.0. Oh, excuse me, that's par 5s. So the 3s and the 5s are actually equal. That's odd. Okay, so you got a few higher numbers here in the par 3s, but you do have a couple of negatives, especially from Martin Laird, who hadn't played the par 3s well at all. Whereas, I'm going to skip the par 4s just for a second. In the par 5s, look at this. In the par 5s, not a single player who has averaged a top 40 is negative. That's why the par 5s are so darn important here at TPC Deere Run. You have just got to play them well. I can't express it much clearer than that. Every single player who has played multiple years at the John Deere Classic, the past 4 years, or 4 editions, no one is negative on par 5s. Big deal. Big deal. And then finally, par 4s. Some big numbers here. Look at this. They haven't been negative on par 4s either. Not a single one negative in terms of par 4s. Now, the distance, 400 to 450, you've got a couple of players that are negative, but, I mean, negative 1/10, negative 1/10, negative 5/10. That's not that much. So, perhaps this looks like the range that's probably going to be the most important. That would be my guess. I'm surprised to see that the par 4s are as correlating as it is, but the data's right there. Nobody who's averaged a top 40 finish is negative in par fours either. Last thing for the evening, let's look at some proximities. Some of these players have some pretty good proximities. Really, only Dylan Fratelli has a horrendous number in terms of total procs. Perhaps procs is something. In terms of specific lengths, you got a couple of pretty bad performances in the 75 to 100. A couple of bad ones in the 100 to 125. Might be the 125 to 100, which is the most common. No, was it 125 to 100, 150? I think it was this range. Shucks. Now I'm gonna have to cheat. I apologize. The vision will be skewed. No, I just changed it. Stupid. Let's go back and check Fantasy National very quickly. What was the most important? Okay, so 125 to 150, and that's what we're seeing in Microsoft Excel too. Okay, 125 to 150. So come back, Excel. Yeah, you got one bad performance, but look at this heavy concentration of green. These are some pretty big numbers for a 125 to 150 range. 80, 43, 53, 50. Some fairly big numbers here. For the players that have played TPC Deere Run at an elite level, this 125 to 150 is really, it's kind of starting to stand out a little bit. All right, that's going to do it for the initial research show. Let me bring back everybody in the field this week. That way you can get a look at that. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Always appreciate the support. Thanks for liking the video, commenting, subscribing. It's greatly appreciated. Even with the support after weeks like I just had, where it was pretty bad when I chose to play Tony Finau over Ricky Fowler. I tried to be bold and it backfired. So hopefully we'll get back on the right track for the John Deere. Be on the lookout tomorrow morning for those odds. Single out any of these players that you think kind of stand out thanks to the analytics that I've shown. And feel free to reach out to me if I did not shout you out this evening. If you had success for the Rocket Mortgage, would love to be able to shout out more members of the community who had success. So thanks again for all the support and for tuning in. For all the wagers you made this past week for the Rocket Mortgage, for all the DFS contests you played this past week for the Rocket Mortgage, and until I see you tomorrow night for the Data Dive Show, may all your bets be profitable.